Okay, we all ready?
Yes.
Okay, we'll start the meeting. It's a little afternoon, but it's the regular assembly meeting, February 6th, 2023. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Sure. Jeff,
Here.
Bob,
Here.
David,
Here.
Donna, Thomas,
Here.
Mark,
Here.
Scott,
Here. Okay, we have a full assembly today with Assembly Member Mucci zooming in, and it's now time for the voluntary pledge of allegiance.
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, it's time for item 3 on the agenda, approval of minutes. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting on January 17th, 2023.
So move.
Second. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, minutes are accepted. And item 4, amendment and approval of the meeting agenda today. I'd entertain a motion to approve the meeting agenda as presented.
So move.
Second. Any amendments or not? All those in favor of moving forward as presented, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we will move forward with the agenda as presented. There are no public hearings today. There are no bid awards, which brings us to item 7, which is persons to be heard related to items on today's agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to any items on today's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to item 8. Persons to be heard on items unrelated to today's agenda. Please come forward, state your name and who you represent, and there is a 5-minute limit. This is on items not on the agenda.
My name is Sarah Fine Walsh. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a resident of Petersburg and as a licensed attorney who has practiced in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, and as a former prosecutor. I used to work at the Multnomah County DA's office from 2015 to 2017.
My bad.
I chose to work there because they were very aware and concerned of the racial inequity and other problems that plague our criminal justice system, and they had really taken it very seriously, which I admired. I went to a training I was a certified law student, so I could try cases, misdemeanors, and violations of restraining orders. I went to a training where we learned about various concerns in the community. It was considered a gang training. It was given by a district attorney and a police officer. We learned about a lot of different things, including white supremacist gangs, what they considered white supremacist gangs, including one, a group. This was, again, 2015 to 2017 when I was there, a group that at that time was very, very new and had become a concern of law enforcement called the Thin Blue Line. They used a symbol, a black and white American flag with a blue line in place of one of the white lines. They told us that the Thin Blue Line is just the beginning of a sentence. The full phrase, there's different versions to be heard in different settings. If you're speaking in public, one such phrase would be the thin blue line between good and evil, or the thin blue line between order and chaos. But they told us that in closed circles, the real phrase was the thin blue line between white and black, and that it was an explicitly white nationalist organization, and that if we ever saw the symbol, that we were to say something. Because it's not safe. Shortly after This is when I noticed it. Shortly after our police chief, Jim Kerr, filed his lawsuit against us, he put up a thin blue line flag in the police department. I actually don't know that it's him. I just know that it's up in the police department. You can see it after dark. It gets really dark early sometimes because the light is on inside. It's still business hours, and you can see the thin blue line flag is very prominently displayed from the outside of the borough building when you're driving past the library on Haugen. As a person who grew up with both a Christmas tree and a menorah in my house, it was very upsetting to see a Christmas tree next to the thin blue line flag. I brought this to the attention of the borough administration, my experience in the criminal justice system and my understanding of the meaning of the flag. And they put it through a review. And they said they wouldn't be taking it down because in Alaska, it doesn't have a racist meaning. And it's the same symbol. It is still a black and white flag with a blue line through it. And I don't understand how a police officer could get on a plane from Portland and land in Petersburg. Maybe if they wanted to interview for a job and they would have to see that symbol and think, oh my God, what's wrong in Petersburg? It's the police department. It just, the symbol doesn't change meaning that rapidly. And I'm running out of time here. Very recently, the LAPD banned the thin blue line flag from their police department. This happened just January 21st, and a lot of other police departments have followed suit, including the Vancouver Police Department in Washington. My home police department, the Portland Police Bureau, put out a statement that they do not use the symbol, period. They don't have a ban, but they don't use the symbol. And I just think there are other ways to support law enforcement by using a symbol that is this divisive and that I was specifically warned about in a gang training. And I just, you can get a blue light bulb from the hardware store and it won't mean the same thing. I think there's a way to do it. And I just want to state my objection publicly, and that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you for your testimony today. Is there anyone else in the audience that has something they'd like to testify today on items that aren't on today's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, board, commission, and committee reports. And the first item there is homelessness in Alaska presentation. Brian Wilson, Executive Director of the Alaska Coalition of Housing and Homelessness, at the request of the Housing Task Force, will give a presentation on the impacts of homelessness in Alaska and how other communities address homelessness. So if you are in the room, Mr. Wilson.
He's actually on Zoom.
Oh, there you are. You are in the room. You have the floor.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
You're fine. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for having me today. As you heard, my name is Brian Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness. I have a PowerPoint today, so I hope you can see it, but if you can't or it's challenging to see, I'll make sure to email it to Deborah so you can circulate it among everybody. I was asked to come here and talk a little bit about homelessness in Alaska and what other communities are doing to address their localized homeless populations. But I wanted to start a little bit first about who we are as an organization, because we're here to be a resource for communities as they're going through their strategic planning processes and implementation of programs. The Alaska Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, or as we call it, AKCH2, because it's a super long name, we're essentially just a continuum of care organization. It's a HUD region, and there's about 400 of these across the country. That's an entity that's responsible for planning and implementing the homeless response network for their region. And you can tell that this region was not really designed by somebody from Alaska, because Alaska only has 2 of such regions. One is in Anchorage, and that's ran by the Anchorage Coalition on Homelessness. And then there's one for everywhere else. So 660,000 square miles is to be managed by one single entity, which is no easy feat, as you know, because homelessness and housing issues look entirely different in Petersburg than they do in Savunga on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Straits. And so it's a really challenging thing for our organization, our board, to do, because we have to set policy that's uniform to the entire state. So what we do is we try to be as flexible as possible, but then also really rely on localized relationships such as the Petersburg Housing Task Force or other homeless coalitions around the state to kind of be our eyes and ears and say what's working and what doesn't. Obviously, housing and homelessness is a really complex situation to address. And so we really rely on key partnerships with a lot of the folks that are listed on the screen now. This is not an exclusive list, but we're very in lockstep with the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, the Mental Health Trust Authority, other state entities, philanthropy. So the Rasmussen Foundation is a key entity and partner of us. And then also like local homeless coalitions as well throughout the state. So seeing as we're a coalition, it's not just a coalition of one. We work with a lot of different entities around the state in our strategic planning. Before I dive into like Petersburg specific stuff, I think it's really important for folks to understand the scope of the work of the statewide coalition, as we want to be here as a resource, but also there's other funding sources that you may be able to tap into going forward as you're going through your planning process. So the policy making that we do as a board is really about everything when it comes to somebody interacting with the homeless response network, where they're interacting with it, what questions are being asked of them, what data is collected, how are folks prioritized for housing referrals, and all the way on to once somebody's housed, how are we making sure that they have a successful outcome with like being surrounded by social supports. We also administer a number of federal grants and statewide grants, namely the Continuum of Care Grant, which is a HUD grant that pays for about 12 different supportive housing programs around the state. We have youth-specific grants that target minors and transition-aged youth that are experiencing homelessness. HUD issues special notices of funding as well. We just submitted one recommending 6 new programmatic programs to be funded throughout the state. And I don't know if you saw this last year, but Alaska became or established its own statewide housing trust, which our coalition in partnership with the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness staffs. And so we actually help out with that rank and review process. Pertinent to what I'm going to get to in a couple minutes, we also co-govern the Homeless Management Information System, which is called HMIS. That's all the data that's entered about clients by agencies. And we do a heck of a lot of advocacy and education, not just for communities. I'm located in Juneau, the Capitol building's right across the street. We get hit up a lot by elected officials on, you know, is this bill I'm proposing a best practice, or how many folks are experiencing homelessness in my district, so on and so forth. Also kind of just like a foundation, and I do this with every presentation that we do. It's really important to recognize that homelessness is everywhere in Alaska. There's a large number of folks that think it's just like an Anchorage thing or a big city thing. In the reality, we see homelessness everywhere, particularly now with the cost of housing skyrocketing. It's much harder to maintain housing, particularly if you are extremely low income, which every community has extremely low income individuals. And one thing leads to another, and people end up in houseless situations. It may look different from community to community. The numbers might be smaller, but the relative impact to smaller communities and the smaller numbers is a big thing to talk about. Petersburg is great. They've been participating in point-in-time counts for the last couple of years. We just had one last week. That's a lot of effort to put into counting individuals and collecting good data. But it's a nice baseline to have for your community to kind of better understand the scope of the issue that's happening locally. Homelessness is another foundational thing, looks different depending on where you're at. In Southeast Alaska, it's not as much of a problem, but there are many communities and census districts across the state where overcrowding is a massive issue, where the problem is just we just don't have enough homes. We have one area where over 50% of the homes meet the federal definition for overcrowding. That's a very unique Alaska thing, and another challenge that we have as a statewide organization that create strategic plans to address. And then this is probably the most relevant to Petersburg here, is that the third truth about Alaska is that our service capacity to help folks who are in houselessness or homelessness is extremely limited, particularly the more rural you go. This is a heat map showing how many beds there are for like shelter beds, permanent supportive housing beds, transitional housing beds are in each census area per capita. And so you'll see that most of the rural communities are in red because they have very little or like a deep orange. And the subtext to this chart here is that for a lot of these communities that are like red or deep orange and have very limited resources, most of those are just like domestic violence shelters, which are really important to have. But just having a housing resource in a community doesn't mean that those beds are targeted for all individuals. So there are a lot of populations that are facing homelessness, particularly in our rural communities, that have no options locally as it stands today to find safe and stable housing. So as we get into the assessment that Petersburg is going into, looking at housing things, and we start talking about data, I think it's really important to remember that homelessness is a very expensive thing, and it's expensive whether you're investing in programs or whether you're not. The most expensive thing a community can do is nothing, because no community actually is doing nothing. You're just addressing homeless populations in a variety of different ways, and it's really hard to quantify that number because those expenses are happening across several different budgets. Calls to service for police or EMS, ER visits, even things like maintenance of areas that are, got messy with solid waste or whatnot as a result of like an encampment that happened there. These things are very costly to an annual budget, and we don't really think about it in that way, but it is something that your community is actively spending money on today. We also know that housing folks is cheaper than doing nothing. We know that it's effective. There's a number of studies that we can show, not just from other places in the country, but here in Alaska, showing the effectiveness of getting people into housing and their ability to resolve other complicating factors that led to that situation. The quicker you can intervene with somebody and get them out of homelessness, the less compounding issues you're going to have to deal with that are getting really expensive and difficult down the line, whether it be addressing somebody's lack of income that led to that situation, or the trauma that they're experiencing by not having a safe and stable home over their head that night. It's so much more difficult and more expensive to pull out folks from homelessness that have been experiencing that for years and years and years. But what we do know is when you do house folks, we've seen in communities, Southeast communities even, that ER visits from those clients that are housed reduces, police and EMS calls reduce, the income of individuals who are connected with case management increases, whether they get on like disability or they're connected to employment services. And even when social supports aren't required, like you don't have to participate in a peer group or you don't have to go to mental health therapy or something like that, we've seen that the clients are, just because by being housed and not having that trauma on them, they're engaging in services more. Even the Alaska OMB in a recent report showed that the costs of shelter, police, or API stays far exceed the amount of costs that it is for an average bed night at a Housing First program. So relevant to Petersburg, I had a conversation with Annette, who I think is on the call here, and it was really encouraging to hear that the Assembly recently allocated some funding to do a housing assessment locally. I get a lot of calls from different communities, and they're like, where do we start? What do we do? I don't know what to do. The first is to really scope out the situation. And so I don't know the full scope of what Petersburg's looking for in that assessment, but it's going to be very rich in data and information about your community and centralize it in one place, such as like, what does your housing stock look like right now? Are you seeing that you have a lot of really expensive units and not a lot of affordable units? That's really important to consider. What are barriers that have been identified for future development? Are there zoning restrictions that could be looked at to encourage affordable housing development? Even things I would hope in the process that landlords are engaged to see, hey, what are you seeing locally? Are you having trouble getting tenants? Are you having trouble keeping tenants? What changes could be made to help with your management of your unit? And then on the other side is a resource that you already have at your disposal now, thanks to the hard work of the agencies locally, which is HMIS data. That point in time count data and other ongoing data entry that they've had about clients they've been working with throughout the year. A lot of communities get really focused in on just, how many homeless individuals are there, and they kind of lose sight of like what those specific needs are of those individuals. And then they'll jump to like, well, we just need a shelter, or we need a permanent supportive housing. That may not be the case. It may just be like, we need some sort of like rental assistance for folks that just lost a job and maybe they're like facing eviction and they can just have a couple of months to get back on their feet. Or there is like maybe like 4 individuals that need long care needs, and how are we going to address those? So there is a variety. There's no silver bullet way or intervention that just addresses homelessness. It's many slices to the pie. So why are we here at the assembly today? One, it's encouraging. Sometimes I have to like really dive in to get assembly participation in homeless services. There's sometimes a lot of finger pointing of like, well, that's your issue to take care of, or it's your issue to take care of. So it's encouraging to see that feedback loop is happening now. But what I can kind of share to you from my experience working with different communities around the state is that those who are most successful at reducing or preventing homelessness are those that have a formalized relationship between the local borough or municipality and their local housing and homeless coalition. No single entity can address homelessness on its own. We need to really come together as a community and bring our shared expertise, whether that be direct service, whether that be grant writing, whether that be strategic long-term planning at a community level. It all has to be on the table to make sure that we are addressing and meeting the goals that we have as a community. And so that could look completely different depending on where you're at. Some cities are big enough where they have departments that can that can focus on that. That's not the case for most of the state. So oftentimes you'll see that there's like a assigned liaison in between the homeless coalition and the assembly, or a staff member. Some assemblies have committees on housing and homelessness that meet regularly and report back to the full body, or incorporate planning into their comprehensive plan updates, even all the way down to the more like minute level or the micro level of being property owners of a building that a agency is operating out of. There's a lot of different ways that strategic public-private partnerships can be made to make projects pencil a lot easier. And that's something that should always be kind of in mind of like how it's not just how this agency is going to be addressing this issue, it's how can we collectively do our part. 2 more slides for you. So I kind of talking this not just as like a TA type of a technical assistance approach, but as an entity that manages millions of dollars of federal grants as well, and has competitive funding every year. It's every year we see the same kind of like formula for communities that are the most successful in securing new funding. And we're really challenged with how do we create equitable funding competitions where it's not just the larger communities that have the most resources and the most grant writing capacity that's going to keep getting it. We actually have written into our policies geographic allocations, small community bonus points to make sure that it's equal and equitable as much as possible for everybody to try to pull down those federal and state funds. But the formula that's continually successful, whether it's a large community or a small one, is that community engagement piece where there's everybody at the table. It's a vetted plan or program that you want to implement in your community that's a part of a larger strategic plan and has the buy-in from multiple entities across the community. It's really important to follow a data-driven approach. A lot of those federal housing programs that have the millions of dollars that are available, they're all about objective criteria for awarding programs. Have you measured your population? Do you see in your data that you have individuals with these specific needs that you want to stand up new programs for? So that's really important and along the best practices. And then finally, the point that I make, which is weird from the housing guy here, but to not be just housing only tunnel vision. I'm a major advocate of housing first. I don't think there should be barriers to somebody having safe and stable housing. I think it's near impossible for somebody to resolve their homelessness if they don't have a house and they're facing trauma of not knowing where they're going to sleep that night. That's very difficult to then get a job and address mental health and behavioral health. But once somebody is in housing, it's really important to ensure that there are those supports that are easily accessible without barriers to those individuals so they can address the needs that they have that led to their homelessness. That's where we see those successful outcomes, and successful outcomes leads to successful grant acquisition down the line. So my final slide here is resources. I'm totally open for questions or discussion or whatever, but there are a number of resources that Petersburg can tap into, the best of which is what other folks are doing around the state. I wouldn't necessarily send Petersburg to go talk to Anchorage because they have way more funding capacity. It's not really relevant to what a smaller community can do. Nor are they the best example of how to address homelessness in the state. But there are other communities that are smaller, like Bethel or Nome or even Kenai, that have gone through strategic planning processes, that have successfully pulled in funding stacks to start new programs in ways other communities haven't. And I'd be more than happy to do like an e-introduction or whatnot to get you connected to see what worked for them. The Alaska Municipal League just launched a housing task force that's been meeting regularly as well. I'm not sure if anyone from Petersburg has been attending, but they're having a lot of discussions about, kind of guidebooks that and best practices municipalities can take to get involved with their local housing homeless coalition. Data, we are like the clearinghouse for HMIS data. We have a number of aggregate de-identified dashboards that you can tap into that even go down to the community level that shows what we know about homelessness in the state. And so there's a link there. And again, I'll send this slideshow to Deborah so she can pass it on. And then just reaching out to us, like we just want to be here to help. To help guide the conversations going forward in any way that we can. And I'm excited to just learn more about what Petersburg's up to and what your goals are going forward. So again, thanks for the opportunity to join today. And I'll stop my screen share here and pause for any discussion or questions.
Okay, Brian, thanks for your presentation today. Do any assembly members have questions of Brian? Member Lynn?
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. One question, you talked earlier about the resources of your organization and the need, you talked a little bit about the need to comparing Anchorage to some of the smaller communities like ours and the need to change funding sources, et cetera, from that. Can you put some meat on the bones of what you're talking about and what types of things are available to the smaller community?
Yeah, that's a great question. We talk about this quite a bit, and it's a big frustration that we have because it's no secret that if you look at where funding has traditionally been allocated and how much goes to our more densely populated communities and to our rural communities, it's extremely lopsided and not equitable. Yet we see regularly that the costs of implementing new programs and addressing homelessness in rural communities is far more expensive. Even just from a development cost, it can be extremely expensive. And so in our grants that we manage, so you're looking at the Continuum Care Grant, the YHTP grant, the Statewide Housing Trust is going to be the same exact way. We're going through the first funding cycle of that now. We award bonus points to smaller communities that are getting engaged in this type of planning. We allow bonus points, and it's all the higher score you get, the more chance you have of getting funded. For communities that are standing up programs that haven't existed in that community. We have equity factors, looking at racial equity factors across different communities, cost of living factors. And so it's what we're trying to get across is that don't be discouraged. Like it's like we're going to, a fight and we're the small guy there. There's a lot of opportunities out there for smaller communities to be extremely competitive against grants proposals from larger communities that have been traditional recipients of these funds. In fact, even for the Statewide Housing Trust, we have Board of Trustees meeting later today. They're talking specifically about allocating a certain percentage of the overall award to smaller communities or communities that are under a certain population level. So that's really what I meant by that. That's a big charge of our board, is to be as equitable to rural communities as possible.
I have one follow-up question to that. Is there any of the small communities similar to the size of ours that have a model or a process that, from your perspective, is probably, the state of the art, or at least the best you see that we have going in the state?
Oh, in terms of like a program type, or just an
Yes, a
approach to
program
the-
or a process that they've used to.
Yeah, so again, I'm going to go back and be like, there's no one size fits all. That like things are very community specific, and there's already existing capacity in some form in each community that looks completely different. So I would be remiss to say like this is exactly what you should do, but what I recommend is doing what you're doing now. The housing assessment is going to be educational. The HMIS data that you have is going to show you, and what the agencies know, what the specific needs of Petersburg are. And then once you identify that, there are best practices to address each of those needs already. It's not like you have to reinvent the wheel or get super creative and create some new program that's never existed before. For the higher needs folks that have long-term homelessness, that have chronic disabilities and co-occurring disabilities, permanent supportive housing programs are very successful. For your lighter touch folks that just like got maybe evicted, or they lost their job, or they have like a little bit of like mental health stuff that they want to address, like rental assistance programs that tapers off over time has been really effective, or transitional housing. It really is dependent on what you're seeing locally. And that's sort of my like, don't get the cart before the horse. Like look at the data, and that will inform probably the best route for Petersburg. And by the
Thank
way,
you.
the funds that we do manage as a coalition, they can pay for a variety of interventions, not just like those big permanent supportive housing programs that you see in like Juneau or Anchorage, but even just small rental assistance or transitional housing programs as well. It really depends on what you need.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you once again, Brian, for your presentation today.
Appreciate it.
Okay, and so we'll move on on our agenda to Housing Task Force Land Trust, and Task Force member Gary Albach will report on the concept of a land trust in Petersburg.
Hello, my name is Gary Alba. I'm here for the Housing Task Force, and going to try to explain the the land trust idea and then just take questions. It's a real complex kind of a setup, but not so once you just get the gist of how it works. And first, I'd like to say thank you for you guys approving the funds for the housing needs assessment, because that will tell us if maybe this is a good idea for Petersburg, maybe something that actually fits in what's happening here. So anyway, all of this information is based on what Sitka has done with their land trust. They're kind of the only one in the state so far. And they base theirs on what's called Trust Montana. The entire state of Montana has a land trust program. And basically what it is the borough, the land trust is set up usually like in Sitka's case, volunteers. They volunteered to set up this trust, which meant they had to get a hold of other people. And there are grants available through Rasmussen actually to help you get your way through all the paperwork that needs to be done to form this trust. And it's really involved. But anyway, so you get your trust set up. And then what happens is the borough gives the trust land. It can be an entire subdivision. It can be just a lot here, a lot there. It's very flexible. And then that becomes trust land. Okay, and then the trust finds applicants who want to own their first house. And they have to go through a qualifying system there that, you know, they have to first answer a whole bunch of questions about their, you know, they have to meet income requirements, which are usually low income requirements. Because this is all meant to make land, or not land, but make the homes affordable forever, not just to one person. This home will be affordable for the lifetime of the home. So they get the information on income, whether or not they cannot own any other properties. They can't sublet the property. There's a whole bunch of requirements. And one of those is they have to get pre-approved through AHFC, saying that they will give them the mortgage and at what rate, so that the land trust knows they can afford this home once it's built and they move in. So the borough gives the trust the property, it becomes theirs. Then the owner will own the home, but they will never own the property. They lease the property from the trust. So then let's say, for instance, the trust and the trust already has about 7 house plans that they've already been using to build these homes. And they range from, one of them is like a 480 square foot home that has 1 bedroom, 1 bath. It's like a tiny home. And they're available for $159,000. And they go on up to a home they have that's 1,100 square feet, has 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, and it's $275,000. Now, you know, it has small rooms, because for 1,100 square feet, it's kind of hard to get that many rooms, but they do. And so they have this wide range. That's like top to bottom scale and everything in between. So the homeowner picks the plan, gets pre-approved that yes, they can afford it. They have to show that, you know, that they have the ability to pay on a monthly basis, and they have, you know, they do that. And it's not like they have never been able to afford a payment or whatever. So anyhow, so they agree and they build this house on there. Then the borough collects the property tax on the cost of the structure only, not the property tax of the land. It's just the structure. So that, you know, that, because that's all figured into their mortgage. And so that helps keep their costs down there. So anyhow, they say you bought a home that's $200,000 and you live in it for 7 years and you decide, well, I'm on my feet now and I need something different. I want to get out of where I am and get another house. So what happens is at the beginning, the house and the property is assessed. Or sometimes I use a pricing index instead of using appraisers. But you can do it however you want, however the land trust sets it up. And so when they purchased that home, maybe the entire thing appraised at 200,000. And that included land, house, everything. And then 10 years later, they say, well, or 5 years later, I want to sell this house. And it gets appraised at 300,000. So that's $100,000 they can make. Well, they can only make 25% profit when they sell this house. That is part of keeping costs down. So instead of turning around and selling that home at the $300,000 appraisal, now they'll only be able to advertise it for 225. So that next person is realizing a great savings because the cost of the land and that big gain in value, it doesn't happen. That's what keeps these homes from ever getting priced out of the market, is that 25% is a limit. And you can make it whatever you want. It's up to the land trust, but that's what Sitka does. And so that's how it remains affordable. And they get to keep any equity they've got into the home, paying their mortgage for that 10 years or that 5 years. They get that out of it, plus that 25% of the overall profit. So I think I'll just kind of leave it at that. One thing they do, so how do you get this, make it viable, the trust? The gal that kind of helped set up the whole thing in Sitka, she put in a lot of time, almost 2 years for nothing. She just volunteered. She wanted this to happen. And I gave her information to Debbie, but and she's willing to talk to anybody. She's very willing. And so what they do, so the homeowner gets their mortgage, which includes, their insurance to cover it and everything. And then there's a $75 a month fee that they have to write a check to the land trust on top of whatever mortgage they're paying to whoever. And the utilities they pay to the borough and all that. And that goes, $50 of it goes to cover the cost of doing business for the trust. Well, that obviously doesn't cover hardly anything. What they tried doing originally was adding 10% to the cost of the home. So if it's a $200,000 home, they were getting $20,000, and that went to running the administration, all the costs of that. But that just upped the cost of the homes, and so they got out of that. They were hoping the borough would help them out, but they said no. So really, it's being run by volunteers, which is awesome because these other people are benefiting from it. So $50 of it goes to their administration, and then $25 goes into a home maintenance fee for that address, not to the individual that's in the house, but to that address. So if they sell it in 5 years and take off and there's never been any maintenance to it, they don't take that money with them. It's still there for the next person that comes in. If that home needs maintenance, there's a little money there they can use to do the maintenance. This one place in Sitka, they added on to that an HOA fee, because they'll come in the winter and plow the driveways and all that. But that doesn't have to happen either. The trust really sets its own rules. So it's very flexible. So basically that's it. It just takes a long time to set it up. I think my recommendation would be, first, the borough would have to agree that, yeah, maybe, we could give up a few parcels. And it sounds like a good idea. And then I think they'd have to ask for some volunteers in the community to get it going. Because I don't know that you'd want to pay anybody to set it up. We're trying to keep costs at a minimum and keep the cost to the first-time homeowner or whoever ends up in the home, single mother, whatever, keep it as low as possible. And that's what this is really about. So any questions?
Questions of Gary? Member Lynn?
Yeah, I thought, two questions for you, Gary, and first, thanks for looking into it. One of them is there any of them that you looked at from down south, Montana or so forth, it's been in existence for a long period of time or a longer period of time that has a history that you looked at?
I think Montana would be the one that's the longest. I don't know exactly how many years. Dave might know.
Yeah, I can answer that. This is a concept that's been around for over a century. I don't know the exact places, but there are places that have had this similar concept around. So it's not a new concept. It's around nationwide. The Sitka folks modeled theirs after Montana because that seemed to be most applicable to the situation up here. The thing that I was actually over there a week ago, so a little bit over a week ago, went to their annual meeting and then spent quite a bit of time with them. And the thing that I thought was really interesting, the majority of the people out of 5 of the 7 units that are occupied are basically women, single mothers, teachers. You know, you got to make money to be able to do this. This isn't the bullet to solve the entire housing problem. It's a part of it. And I would call this more the solution for middle income to lower middle income. So what this does is it enables somebody to be able to qualify for a loan that makes $60,000 a year. It's kind of what the figure they gave me that you had to make to be able to qualify for a loan for one of these houses. So it's going to be somebody that's going to have a pretty good job with the borough, a school teacher, a police officer, or somebody like that. So that's kind of what this concept is trying to get at. And it's like a starter home, you know. A lot of people don't have a down payment. They don't have the financial background to be able to buy their first home. This enables them to get into their first home, build equity, make a little bit of money, and then as their family grows or their financial situations, then they can move on to their next home. And then when they move on, then it makes it available to another young person. And the thing that I liked about this concept is most of the people that were moving into these homes were young and they had kids. 2 things we need in our community.
Member Mark?
Yes, thank you. So if I understood correctly, the borough is the one who gives up the property. Is there any financial obligations that they have to maintain different parts and pieces, or does the trust then do the maintenance for roads or for upkeep on the properties themselves? So I'm just wondering, at what cost will this be towards the borough?
Well, hopefully the way it would work is any lot that the borough would want to give up, or maybe several lots, would already have main road and services to the property line. And then one avenue you can go with is the Rasmussen Foundation gave Sitka $265,000 to put towards land development. So what they did then is broke it down and said, okay, we're going to allot $30,000 to each of these homes we hope to build. And that's going to cover the cost of bringing the water, sewer, electrical into the property. And say if you're going to drive pilings, that cost go to those pilings, the cost to get them driven. So that then the homeowner, so that's covered by the grant. So then the homeowner is just paying for the building from the foundation up. And so there should be no added expenses at all to the borough, other than if it's on a main road that's already there and already getting plowed. I mean, they're going to pick up water, getting garbage, but they're going to charge for that. So there is no long-term, liability to or any kind of cost to the borough, other than giving that property initially. And another thing is that a lot of these homes, like some of them are small. So the borough could take one lot, and if through zoning to make it 2 lots, you get 2 of these on one, then it's just better off for the person that's going to be in there. And the borough's going to get more bang for their buck as far as getting property tax. They have two structures on it. And the people don't own the land, the people in the house, so they can't move in there and then apply to the borough, build a big garage and out back without going through the land trust, because it's not the borough's land anymore. It's the trust. So everything has to be approved by them. And if all of a sudden they have 2 4-wheelers and a few, snow machines and a boat with a hole in it that's growing trees out of it, the trust has every right to go there and say, you need to clean up our property. So they keep an eye on these places. Like Dave said, they have 5 now. They have 2 already ready to go this summer, and they're hoping for a 3rd one. And they continue to monitor these places after they, get these people in them. And they go around and they make sure the people are doing good and make sure they keep their places clean and just help them in any way they can. So as far as there's nothing else the borough would need to do than give up the land, basically.
Excuse me, Gary. So what, this is kind of a hypothetical thing, I guess. What would happen? The trust owns this land and it's run by volunteers. Guess it's 2 questions. What happens if the volunteers quit volunteering? And if the trust doesn't keep the land? Can they sell the land?
I'm sure that they have that in their bylaws or whatever.
So if we form a trust out.
It's a, that's why I left the information. You can go on there and look it up, but they have this, it's a lawyer kind of thing. It's all the stipulations as far as that land and the trust owning it, what they can and can't do with it, and what happens if something like what you said happens. I don't know that you could call Mim and she would tell you. But I do know, she told me one thing, that when they set this up, they had a consultant and steering committee, and they adopted what she called the National Ground Lease. And it's how they're set up to lease that property to the homeowner. And she said that was one of the most important parts of the whole thing. I think that covers what you're talking about.
Something that popped up in this.
Because they can resell the house, but they cannot rent them out. They have to be the one living in it. And then when they're ready to resell it to sell it to someone else, those people also have to be approved by the trust.
So you have these typically single parent families get the land for free, and then they have to build a house. Are there good financing options available to do that?
The only one doing that is AHFC. And they are the ones who've done all the ones they have now. It's the only one willing to take the chance. And so far, the first one was a real nightmare, they said. As always, the first thing is working with the contractor, making sure they didn't go over on cost, blah, blah, blah. And got all that ironed out. And now AHFC is continuing doing all these next 3 that they're going to do. And kind of the one thing when you think about it, so let's say the house has gone through one owner and they sold it after 5 years and they got their equity and left, and the house went up in value $100,000, but they're only able to sell it for $25,000 more, not the whole $100,000 more. So now AHFC is going to refinance it for the next owner. Well, they got to be happy because now they're only financing $225,000 and knowing already the home's worth $300,000. So if, they got stuck in the paperwork, they'd be profiting if they turn around and sold it to someone else. If they had to take the land from the trust or whatever, the home. So the more they do, the better off AHFC is for loaning. And so they're the only one so far though that's been willing to work with them. And the house has to be built to local codes, just like any other house.
First Bank is even considering now, one of the problems they had was, and you know more about this than I do, Gary, being a builder, is construction loans. So now First Bank is even going to just loan the money to the housing trust to kind of eliminate the steps in financing. So First Bank's definitely enthused about this. And the Rasmussen Foundation has been very enthusiastic about it and wanting to give them money. They've given them up to $800,000 now. They're doing another subdivision right next to this one with plans to build another, I think, 7 homes there. So if anybody goes over to Sitka, it's a very interesting development. The houses are well built. They're not custom built homes, but they're built with really good materials. They're not cheaper materials or anything, because their goal is to have these houses last for, a long time. So they want to make sure they're built right.
Yeah, I looked at some of those plans and stuff. Like you said, they're a generic kind of thing, but they're built to code, so they have to be built well.
I mean, this is just a question about Montana, but wasn't the land trust program in Montana for like large tracts of land with ranchers and farmers and?
I don't know the specifics of that. If it was just for large or if it was community, but like I said, you could call Sitka and find out. She would know. But one thing to make sure, what you said before, they're not giving the homeowners the land. It always remains with the trust. The person that gets in there will never own the land. So but they're not renting. It's just a great thing, they're actually getting equity out of their money they're paying their mortgage every month. So.
Questions? Are there any other questions? Not seeing any interest. So thank you, Gary, for your presentation and what the Housing Task Force has been doing. And that brings us to item C, and that's Chairman of the Housing Task Force, Assemblymember Kinsinger, will report on the idea to prepare lots for sale that can easily be hooked up to utilities.
Yeah, pretty quick. And this is mainly thanks to Gary. He kind of went through and looked at every place in town where the city owns property and identified, approximately 5 lots that the borough currently owns and have roads on them that could relatively easily be hooked up to power and sewer and water. I know we have talked about as a group, and we've had P&D look at developing other subdivisions. And I think we've all had sticker shock on the development costs of those. But so I'd consider this to be the low hanging fruit if the assembly was interested. Carl Hagerman had looked specifically at some of these lots and came up with some very preliminary estimates of what it would cost to bring water and sewer and electrical to them. Of course, the details on what we would want to do with these lots, what is our purpose with these lots, how do we want to go about this, how do we want to sell them would of course be an assembly decision. But we just wanted to point out that there is some low hanging fruit that we can, if we feel there's a need for additional building lots in town, they are available.
Okay. Step towards a decision, what's available. Next item is Housing Task Force Manufactured Homes. Housing Task Force member Holmgren will report on the idea of zoning, developing an area for manufactured homes.
Thanks for having me. I looked also at the entire borough's property viewer, which I truly appreciate in both my personal life and my professional life, but also it was very helpful to go through it and see where manufactured homes could be put in service area 1. We know that they can be put out in service area 2 because of the more liberal zoning that's out there and that there aren't really any requirements aside from what maybe the state requires. So I looked specifically in service area 1 because what I'm seeing in my own world of real estate is people are not able to afford since interest rates have gone up. And remembering when I moved to Petersburg when I was a young child in the 80s, there were a lot of manufactured homes because interest rates were quite high, and that's what middle income to lower middle income families could afford at the time. Plus, they're often used as a stepping stone to stick-built homes that, and maybe some of you even started out in a manufactured home before you made that step to a stick-built home. I found 4 large tracts of land that the borough does own. It's along North 8th Street. So I believe it's Excel that takes you up to the ball field. So it's as you head over to the Lighthouse Assembly of God Church. Right now, they're all zone multifamily, which means someone could put an apartment complex up to 9 units. That's what the zoning allows currently. Gary was nice enough to go walk them and identified one of them that seemed like it was probably the most easiest to develop. And actually it is one of the closest to the water and sewer that come around and where they kind of dead end right by the Assembly of God Church. So water and sewer does not come down 8th Street. It does not connect the two, Excel and what road that is now, like the Lake Street area. So they don't connect on that that area. It's also kind of off by itself. It's not surrounded by other homes or it's down below the ball field. And I mapped it out and it's about 5.5 acres worth of, the track is larger than that. The one track I was looking at was 5.5, but when you look at like the flat area, there was one section, it was about 1.5 acres. And most mobile homes or manufactured homes are on 50 by 100 lots. That's what the borough has for sale, or not for sale, excuse me, has zoned up at the end of Lumber Street. So if you were to put that in, you could put potentially 14, anywhere from 8 to 14 units, depending on how small you made the units, so, or the pieces of land. So when I look through the rest of Area 1, there are 2 other spots you can put a manufactured home. You can put it in two different parks. So you're perpetually paying land rent for your entire life while you own your home. And there's always the risk of the landlord increasing the rent or changing the parameters of what they want and then forcing you to move your home. And where do you go? There are lots that the borough has zoned mobile home park. That's at the end of Lumber Street. But if you look specifically at what mobile home park zoning in Petersburg is, it is specific for, it says to provide residential neighborhood for single family mobile home owners on rented space. So you would even have to change that zoning to allow someone to purchase it and put a home on it if they wanted to be up in that neighborhood. I'm proposing to just examine this piece of parcel that is close to town, close to services, could accommodate families with 1 vehicle because they're in town, and the fact that you cannot, there's no place right now you could do that. If you do head out of town, and you're still in Service Area 1 and you're on a piece of lot that says that's zoned rural residential, you still have to get a conditional use permit to put a manufactured home. So there really isn't any place that a homeowner that wants to buy a brand new manufactured home can purchase it and place it in Service Area 1. So I'm just proposing or suggesting that the assembly you look, or maybe planning and zoning looks at it more carefully and then brings it to you, is potentially taking a section of that multifamily plot that is already was zoned with the anticipation of multiple families living in a smaller area and consider allowing it to be changed so that it could possibly, each lot could be sold off 50 by 100 lots for people to put in new manufactured homes. So, that's it.
Thank you. Any
Yeah.
questions? Member Lynn?
Define for me, Sarah, the definition you're using for manufactured home is the same definitions as in our codes.
In your codes, you refer to them as mobile homes, but in the industry, it's manufactured is what they've changed the name to, because they're not designed to truly be mobile anymore. They're designed to be set and put on a permanent foundation like the code requires. And then you can get a 30-year loan on it, actually.
Then in your mind, then we also should go back and look at our zoning codes and our definitions at the same time.
Well, yeah, I think that's possible because you can't purchase land right now with the intent of putting one on there. Right now, your code specifically says mobile home park, and what that definition is for renting the space, not purchasing it and, owning it indefinitely with your home. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your presentation today. Okay, it brings us on to item 10, the consent agenda. And that's the Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks Lounge, number 1615, is applying for a 2023-2024 liquor license renewal. And so they've applied to the Alaska Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office for a liquor license renewal, and the assembly may support or protest this application. But I'd entertain a motion that we approve this liquor license application for the Elks Lodge.
So move.
Second.
Discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Scott,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yep. Okay, we will renew their liquor license for the year. Now we're up to report of other officers on today's agenda, and the first person up is Petersburg Medical Center CEO, Mr. Hofstadter.
Hi, good afternoon. Phil Hofstadter, Peterborough Medical Center CEO. So based off the last or couple of borough sessions, I provided a written report. And just pretty condensed version of activities for the last month. It's basically the CEO report I put into the to a board meeting. I break it down by 5 headings based on our strategic plan. So we have workforce wellness, community engagement, patient-centered care, new facility, and financial wellness. I added a couple of graphs in there related to the activity and the encounters of primary care. I looked at some of our census information, bed stays in our inpatient and long-term care, and then our ER visits are also in part of those graphs, but I'm able to provide any kind of information you'd like. I also provided some financial information. That's definitely something that we've been working on in our last mid-year review with the budget and really having a constrained cash flow as we come out of COVID. We have a return on some of our volumes, but it's certainly have some lag time. We've had a lot of inflationary adjustments. We've had a lot of delays with our payers, our commercial insurance, Medicare and Medicaid. It's been really challenging recouping from those payers in general. I'm happy to go into any detail, any questions you have. I have some updates on the new facility, but maybe I'll just see if anyone has any questions on the report.
Marsh.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I appreciate the written report. It was informative. So I understand in my other life working with Medicaid, Medicare, and we don't work with Medicare, but they are experiencing staffing shortages, which I'm sure affect the revenues that you bring in to recoup your expenses based on the services you provide. So do you see any subsiding of these short-term or these short staffing issues? You say here that your year-to-date net loss of 10%. How do you anticipate recovering that as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. So a couple of things related to that. We've had to pay back Medicare. Medicare provided us an advance payment during COVID in the order of $5 million. So a lot of our payback, which we're almost done, in the last couple of years, we have maybe, I think $400,000 left in that. So roughly $200,000 each month goes back to Medicare to pay back for their advance payment. And secondly, a lot of our cash flow, or they call it accounts receivable, certainly we're working with the state Medicaid directly. They have had some staffing issues and challenges at the state level. They've been very responsive. Hopefully this will be a short-term kind of fix, but also we've had some settlement issues as well. So, you know, what are we looking at from a program standpoint? Which programs do we want to support long-term? Which ones do we want to maybe constrain or close, restrict hours? Those are all possibilities as we go forward. Our payer source, you know, when you look at programs, primary care doesn't pay, right now it pays 58 cents on the dollar. So primary care is a challenge. You know, when you're looking at it, home health is considerably less, and home health has been, you know, it exploded during COVID because we were keeping people out of the hospital. We were taking care of patients in their home, and that continues to grow. But the reimbursement strategy on those is pretty dismal. So a lot of these, I also advocate at the federal level with Senator Murkowski. I also am planning on testifying in Juneau at the legislative session when I fly in next week. So we've had some in mental health as well. Mental health is typically a grant-supported program. It only pays 38 cents on the dollar. So when we look at things that we need and when our programs are supported, we have to, long-term, what does that look like? We cannot float these programs long-term if our payers are not going to support those, or we can't provide grant support. And we've been very lucky with getting grant support, but those are pretty much dried up. So has been an incredible challenge when we're going forward. There's also been inflation, 23% increase nationally for healthcare. We're running right around 20% since 2020 related to increase of costs and expenses. So I think with all those, without the payback and the inflationary costs, I think we actually do pretty well, even though we're hurting a bit. But when we look at the long-term effect of that, the next 4 or 5 months are going to be pretty instrumental on what the landscape looks like. So I'll be reporting out that on monthly. We can make sure to keep you abreast of that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Hofstadter?
And I do have one, I'm sorry, I have one more point with the new facility for capital infrastructure. Our architects presented to the steering committee last week, and they did have 3 concept designs on the land that was provided, and would like to request a work session if possible with the borough and the PMC board to discuss those. We'll happy to invite the architects to do their presentation. I thought it'd be a good idea to review those before going to planning and zoning.
Okay, that sounds like it'd be a good idea. And you mentioned inflation going up, and later in the meeting, we're going to talk about prioritizing our federal, our wish list, capital project list. So if that meeting might be good. We have 3 potential designs for the new facility, and maybe we could come up with a more accurate number than the one that, the 84 million or 86 million, because in my mind, was pre-COVID, and with the inflation and building rates and everything going up, maybe we could get a more up-to-date, accurate number.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
So we'll have to see if we can schedule something like that, Clerk Thompson. And what was your time frame for something like that, Mr. Hofstadter?
Sooner the better if we can. I can work with our board and at your whatever's availability for all of you. I'll make sure it happens.
That worked, Clerk Thompson, if you worked with the medical center and saw what timeframes they had, and then work with the assembly to see when we would be available. And
You bet.
probably should be something separate than a regular meeting.
Yes, more like a work session.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Hofstadter.
Thank you.
Okay, next report is from District Ranger Bourne. And we have a handout that the clerk gave us that was probably supplied by Mr. Bourne, so.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you should have a written report that was sent over to you folks that talks about kind of all the key points I want to talk about today, but focus mostly on kind of some highlights. You heard about the cabin stuff. We talked about that a lot. Moving forward with the planning for 9 more sites. And as we're talking about this BIL funding, it's gone over to the National Forest Foundation. So they're now holding that money in trust for us to do the actual development. So we have 9 sites we're trying to go through the NEPA process. We'll probably wrap that up later this summer and have those available for funding as it shows up. But we have a couple priority sites. Of course, one of them is that West Point cabin repair. That's kind of one of our highest priorities to get that done first. Braylon Slough cabin, that's been delayed because of Section 106 requirements, but we're getting close to wrapping that up as well. And then we're looking at a couple of sites based upon input from people kind of throughout, Bitcoff and Kupanoff Island. So good headway on that. And we'll probably see some development next year, starting to go forward with that kind of process for that. We're planning to do Petersburg Lake Trail renovation. I talked to Kupanoff City this morning. That's a 3-year project out there. So we have crew coming on board this summer. That's what they're going to be doing for the next 3 years. We're working on that particular trail system. But also we have crews coming on to work on trails here on Mitkoff Island, kind of continuing that process. And then we have some more work on the, let's see what we got to do. Mitkoff Island trails and in Cathedral Falls, which is over on Kupanoff, closer to Cake, is a contract. And Ideal Cove is a bridge replacement. That's going to be a contract that we're going to actually work on this year as well too. So that'll be kind of the big cabins and trails projects for this year for us. On the timber side, Upper Falls Creek, we advertised that last Saturday. So that's open for 30 days for advertisement, and bids will be taken starting on 3/7. And that's about roughly, well, It says 597, section 497, this typo there on that particular timber sale. And then we'll continue to look at more of that as we move forward. Thomas Bay Young Growth Timber Sale is a much bigger project. We're looking at that. We should have some stuff out at the end of March, kind of a draft EA for review and comment, a public comment, as we move forward down that process. Hopefully to have that available for market later this fall, maybe by the end of the fiscal year. So that's kind of where we're at with that process, and you should see that as well. On the Cake Access Road, the timber on there, people have expressed concerns about that. I just wrapped up issuing the permits for the variety people in Cake for hemlock for firewood along there from a major portion of that road. A portion of that road that goes from a 12-mile landing up to Portage Bay Road is being considered for a salvage sale. We'll try to process that this year. The tribe has expressed some concerns about that, and we're going to meet with them next week to kind of work through that with the regional forester and figure out our way forward with that. We hope to have all of that timber accounted for this year, and either a sale or it's been issued as a permitting process and stuff like that. The Portage Bay administrative site, that's moving down the road as we go through it this year. Turns out it's a much bigger project than we thought. It requires a forest supervisor sign off on it. So it's being reviewed right now at the forest level for review team, and hopefully we'll have that back and we'll have it issued by the end of this month. A little behind schedule, but that'll be a site for all kind of cultural healing practices for the entire Southeast Alaska. Once it's developed, and we're going to give them a 10-year permit to kind of do that process. The first year will be developmental, kind of getting things put together and all of that, and talking with OVK and a tribe. They just came back from Hawaii, where there's a similar cultural healing process that they actually using the model what they want to do with this. So a very positive step forward, I think, in working together, cultural healing as well as with the tribes, in Alaska here. On the hiring process, well, again, we have this local hiring drive. And I just gave Steve some information on that on March 2nd. In person over at the library from 5 to 7 p.m. There'll be opportunity for people to apply under the Anoka Hiring Authority, which means they have to have been in Alaska for a year to do that. And we're focusing on, we have 10 positions in our recreation staff. We have 4 positions in our timber staff, and we have 1 fisheries position available that we're trying to hire people for. And then the goal is to hire them by the end of March. So it'll be a pretty quick turnaround. They can actually turn in resumes, turn in the questionnaire right there, or they can do it online as well. So there'd be lots of opportunities for that, but we're looking to hire lots of people. But with that, the other side of that, kind of as you talk about housing, I'm concerned about housing for people that may come with families. I'm not set up to have families in my bunkhouse right now, quite frankly. So I'm going to try to figure out how I can help them out with housing if somebody comes with a family and they need more than just a bed. So something to consider. If there's something in the community that's available, please let me know. I'm really interested in that, trying to figure that dynamic out. So we'll see how that goes forward. And then I talked a little bit about meetings, Southeast RAC's coming up February 28th to March 2nd. The advisory committee, Annie Bartholomew is the person to contact. Resource Advisories Committee, that's a local committee from Rural Schools Act. There's now an advertisement out seeking nominations, but it has to be in by February 10th. So it's by Friday to do that. If you're interested in being a part of that particular committee, it's been realigned to where it's the South half of Tongass now. It used to be just Petersburg and Wrangell, so it's a little bigger than that right now, but they're seeking nominations for that. And if you're interested, let me know. I can get Steve the information of how to apply for that particular process with that. And then I just found out today that starting in March, we're going to do what's called SAS FM planning, which is talking about how we work together with communities and partners in planning to work in the Forest Service starting in next year. So starting in March, we'll be reaching out with outreach and discussion of how do we start coming together on what the communities see as needs in the Forest Service. So that's all I have for today. Any questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a quick question regarding housing again. I mean, the Forest Service has the bunkhouse here, and presumably there's some process to obtain that facility. And are you aware of, I mean, any potential avenues, in the Forest Service for, kind of getting them to throw a little weight behind some housing development here for all these employees coming in? Is that common? I mean, there's 20 people. That's fair number of people.
Yeah, it turns out I have 36 beds and I have 38 people coming in. That doesn't count any family members. So I'm like, okay, this isn't gonna work very well. I did look at the BIA bunkhouse next door earlier this week, and that's definitely an option. That's, they're open to renting or maybe selling that place, and that's got, like 34 rooms in there with, so that's definitely an option to consider. I don't know that we need that many rooms, but we may be able to lease a portion of that this year to help out our staff and our crews and things like that. But it's a process. To build a facility here, the last one I built was 1.5 million. So it's like, as you all know, it's expensive to build anything in Southeast Alaska. So the guidance I have is it's better for us to buy than to build. So again, I'm just kind of trying to pursue that a little more.
I have one, Member Newman.
Oh, I'm just curious where these 9 sites are for potential new cabins.
So one down at Mitkoff on Blind Slough, we actually looked at 14-mile mark. We actually pushed that back to the 21-mile mark based upon on the ground looking at stuff. There's one at Woodpecker Cove. And then there's, I'd have to think back. Those are 2 that jumped. Those are highest priority ones for us right now. And again, some of our objectives in looking at these sites was to say that we want to be road accessible. It's more affordable that way. We want to see, can we, well, for a whole bunch of it, easier for us to get to. It turns out that our sites are fly-in sites right now, get very little use. They're very expensive to maintain. And we're hearing from the public is they can't afford to fly in anymore. They want something that's more accessible by road or by boat. So some of them, West Point Cabin, for instance, is one. That's one we're going to refurbish that one. So that's pretty close. And I have to look back. I think Jamaica Lake up above Cake is one of them that we're kind of considering looking at that again along that Cake access road. Again, that road access is kind of the driver for that. But I think I sent a report a couple of months ago on all those sites. I can dig that back out again.
I have a question for you, Mr. Bourne, about the Portage Bay Administration site. So that's in the works right now to get a agreement signed with them for 10 years. Is that going to have any kind of public comment, or is that just all internal?
That's actually been out for public comment already. We sent it out on our site to get some, we did get some feedback, some concerns about conflicts with that site being used for that sort of thing. And we're addressing those and taking a look at those. And that comment period's closing, I think, on Friday on that, if it's not closed already. But yeah, we reached out for public comment, and I've been talking about, in all my public engagements, talking about that to get feedback from people.
Questions? Thanks for your report.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that brings us to the mayor's report. It'll be fairly short today since we have such a long meeting ahead of us. Member Kinsinger and myself and Chris Cotta attended Southeast Conference. It was fairly pretty informative on certain topics. We had visits from Senator Murkowski, the panel from the senators and representatives in the state, and then Senator Sullivan. And in regards to the lawsuit to close down the trolling fishery, though all of those above representatives said they would be trying to supply funding if it passed and if there was litigation. So they're opposed to this closing down the troll fishery. So that was a good bit of news. We talked a little bit about fisheries. I think there was a panel. And it seems like there's an interest in the Southeast for some of the companies like Trident, and OBI is doing a lot of improvements here in Petersburg, but Trident's going to open their Wrangell plant again this year. And they are coming up with their 50 years. So they're going to talk about the next 50 years, and they're trying to get a school together for basically for interns to teach them trades. So looking into working with the state or whoever's available to help them get involved with that. Transportation, talked about the $285 million that the ferry system's getting. A couple ideas that they had that they were just kicking around. We had the Catherine Keith, the deputy commissioner from DOT. There's talk of putting a lot of money into the Matanuska, like up to $50 million out of that money they get, and the state has to match that money, but, and that, if I remember right, remember Kinsinger, they said that would only make it runnable for 2 years. Correct. Yeah, so that's a lot of money. And then they also talked about in the future, free ferries like similar to what the Inter Island Ferry system runs. I believe, can't remember the length, they're like 140 passengers, 20 vehicles. They're talking about trying to make those electric, a combination of diesel and electric. So there was discussion about the infrastructure it would take in the ports to charge them when they came to town. So I didn't see that they had any real firm plan moving ahead. They did talk about the summer schedule and how a lot of people are upset and they're understaffed. And so they're just like a lot of other industries in the country that can't find, workers. Had a conversation, and this was done in an interview with Senator Stedman and some other senators. And currently, if the governor gets his funding for the $3,800 permanent fund, it's going to cost the state $2.5 billion. And so Senator Stedman did a spreadsheet, and if you lowered it to a $1,400 dividend, you could raise the base student allocation, and didn't have a number there, but right around the $500-ish area. But if they did that, $1,400 permanent fund, they could pay off the $500 million state debt and pay off all bonded indebtedness for municipalities in Alaska. So he just threw that in there, and I don't know if you'll get any traction with it, but I thought that was a pretty good idea. I mean, if we could pay off municipalities' debt and still get a little bit of money for people. And I can't think of anything else that really stuck out. Do you have anything that stuck out to you, Member Kinsinger?
No, there was quite a bit of discussion, at least from the House panel, which was basically 3 educators, so, and one other, so, and Representative Stutes from Kodiak, and they were all very supportive of raising the base student allocation to $1,000 a month, and they gave a pretty passionate reason why we need to do that.
Yeah, it sounds like from their perspective that we're not keeping up with funding, we're lacking, we're behind. So I don't know. There is legislation for that $1,000 PSA. Member Lynn?
A question for you. Was there any discussion around on the ferry system with that $275 or $250 million they got? Article in the paper last week, that we need to use it wisely because there probably won't be any more. Was there any discussion about having a group or looking at it, with outside rather than just to have them make a decision of spending $50 million on a ferry,
Like a board of directors? in a sense?
Exactly.
Yeah, Member Kinsinger would know more about that, but this funding is I've seen 3 different numbers. Senator Murkowski said $286 million. State has to match $100 million. And the first cycle of the funding is this year, but it's going to go through 2026, if I believe. Is what the
Right.
proposal is.
There's up to $1 billion. And there's quite a bit of concern, particularly from Senator Murkowski, on how that's being used, and specifically the money that they got right now. They had to fill out grant requests, and they had to specify how they were going to spend that money. To my chagrin, because I've been trying to get them to do this for over 20 years, to have an independent board of directors, but I've been unsuccessful in doing that. They have instituted a new advisory board. I believe the acronym is IHOP, but it's similar to the pancake. But anyway, it is strictly an advisory board. It has no authority outside of advising. So to answer your question, no, there is no outside authority that's going to be directing these funds.
And my opinion, my personal opinion on the presentation by the deputy commissioner of DOT was I wasn't very enthusiastic about any similar marine transportation that we had in the past. So it looks like they're doing a lot of studying and coming up with new ideas, and you've got the design groups and people that are studying it to pieces, and we'll hope, yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on it because it's pretty important that we use the money wisely. So what else? That's my report on that, and not looking for any vacancies, any positions to be filled, so looks like people are helping us out in all the different committees and stuff, so. Now it's time for the manager's report.
Thank you, sir. Parks and Rec will be hosting a distance-based indoor spring triathlon on Saturday, February 11th. Teams and individuals are encouraged to join. Contact Parks and Rec for more information. Registration is in person or online. Water polo and water volleyball will be added to the aquatic center schedule. Check it out if you are interested in jumping in. Schedule can be found on Parks and Rec website and Facebook page. Stephanie Payne submitted a concept paper to the Department of Energy for assistance with energy efficiency upgrades to the community center. If they like the concept, they'll reach back to us and say, now we can fill out a grant application. We will do that, and then it's competitive from that point on. If anybody's interested in coaching or assisting with the youth soccer program, please contact Julie Anderson at Parks and Rec. Our enrollments into our online emergency trauma technician or ETT program are now closed. Students have until February 28th to finish. We have about 8 folks who are currently enrolled. Brian's Firefighter 1 introduction course was pushed back to allow more time for students to enroll. Course starts February 11th and will run Saturdays 8 to 5 until March 25th. Highly encourage folks. If you want fire protection, it's a good idea to jump in here. Presenter for the Community Emergency Response Team or CERT programs was ill when she was scheduled to come to Petersburg. We have arranged for her to present to the public on Sunday, February 26th at 4 p.m. Presentation will be shown at the Assembly Chambers, and the public is invited to join by Zoom if they prefer. After the presentation, Michelle Torres will answer questions with input from the Petersburg Volunteer Fire Department Director and Fire Chief Jim Stolpe. This group would be organized and trained to assist first responders and other government entities in larger scale emergencies. Examples include large fires, large scale search and rescue operations, disaster response, and other threats to the community. DNR issued 2 decisions regarding the borough's land selections last week. Draft comments for both decisions will be submitted to the clerk for agency or assembly review and approval at the next meeting. One of them is related to 550 acres at Thomas Bay, correcting some errors related to the roads over there. There's a 30-day comment period followed by a 20-day appeal period on that one. And there's also a preliminary decision on 3,283 acres in various locations, including Fanshawe, Prowley Point, Hood Point, Southeast Mitkoff, and Sumner Strait, was issued by DNR. That 30-day comment period is now open, and as part of that decision, DNR is proposing to retain 513 acres at Prowley Point. This selection is adjacent to the existing right-of-way for the proposed Kate access road. The elderly housing kitchen plumbing project has been completed. We'll be now looking to update the kitchen in the near future once we are able to coordinate supplies, contractors, and with the food service, Mountain View Food Service folks. Derek met with OSHA to discuss their inspection of assisted living and the state's internal audit of the facility. And our South Harbor dredge is progressing. Hard digging continues to have the contractor looking to the Corps to provide direction per the contract. Corps reps came to town to evaluate the project on the 17th and 19th of January and take samples and check progress. Western is roughly 16,200 cubic yards dumped, and staff continues to urge boat owners to communicate with the harbor office if there are any questions. Project manager and supervisor from the Corps also came to town to look at Scow Bay as they work towards federal budget development and the possibility of sharing costs of a feasibility study for a basin breakwater in that location. Their feedback was very positive, so we're continuing to follow up on that. U.S. Coast Guard dockside exams are being offered through Tuesday, February 7th. Sign up at the harbor office. And the harbor is working on our tour ship schedule. It looks about the same as we had last year. Harbor Board meeting scheduled for Thursday, 2/9 at noon is in the Assembly Chambers. In the Police Department, we're finalizing the upfit of the new police vehicles to get them ready to go so they can hit the street. Petersburg Police Department is working with Alaska Fish and Game and Alaska State Wildlife Troopers on the increased wolf sightings and developing a plan with those other agencies. The chief did attend the Petersburg School District's Alice evacuation emergency drill. And we've submitted a federal grant for $51,000 to upgrade the Petersburg School District radio system so they can contact the police directly in certain emergencies. This will also upgrade the district's ability to talk amongst themselves. The library will be closed Monday, February 6th through Thursday, February 9th for inventory and staff training. And our public works sander went belly up, so it's kind of good that it's not snowing a lot right now. We have ordered the parts and motor pool will start working on putting it back together when the parts get here. Jody and I met with Phil and Joel Pitkin, the hospital controller, to kind of discuss the next steps for assisted living. Jody provided updated financial and budget information, and the hospital's looking through those, and will get back to us if they have any more questions. And that's it, unless there's other questions.
Questions of the manager on his report today? Member Marsh.
I do. Thank you. So on this assisted living piece, is this in preparation for the hospital to assume the responsibility of the assisted living end of Mountain View Manor?
Through the mayor, we're probably too early to make it, just to say that directly.
Okay.
No, I mean, what we are doing is trying to figure out, is there benefit to the community to do it? Meaning, could the hospital run it cheaper than the borough is? Does it make sense for the hospital to run it? And what would that mean to their budget, our budget? So we're still at that stage. I mean, and it's likely going to take a while.
Okay.
It's more of a, I mean, Phil, am I representing it proper? I mean, it's really just, we're doing a lot of talking, which is a good thing because we need to figure out, is this going to work or would it work and how it would benefit the community? So.
Questions of the manager? Okay, thank you, Manager Giesbrecht for that.
Sure.
I think maybe we should take like a 10-minute break or as long as it takes to regroup, and we'll come back and start with unfinished business. Hour and a half at one spread. Okay, we're ready to restart the meeting. All the assembly members are back and we're starting on unfinished business. First item under unfinished business is an ordinance. It's number 2023-01. This is an ordinance amending Petersburg Municipal Code, sections 14.30.030 and 14.30.040 to increase certain service rates at the Mountain View Manor Assisted Living Facility. This is the third and final reading. I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its third and final reading.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Jeff,
Yep.
Scott,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 2023-01 passes in its third and final reading. The next ordinance on, under, unfinished business is ordinance 2023-02. This is an ordinance amending the official zoning map for service area 1 of the Petersburg Borough to rezone parcel B of block 302 Greenbelt subdivision. This is located at 10 North 12th Street from open space recreation to commercial C1. This is a third and final reading. Excuse me. I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its third and final reading.
So move.
Second.
Motion on a second have been made. Is there any discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Thomas,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes. Okay, ordinance 2023-02 passes unanimously in its third and final reading as well. Brings us to item 15 on today's agenda, new business. First item under new business is a resolution number 2023-01. A resolution authorizing the borough manager to pursue obtaining ownership of the Pappy's Landing facilities, including the dock, floats, launch ramp, associated tidelands, and uplands adjacent to the tidelands property, currently owned by the state of Alaska. This resolution revises Resolution 2022-14 to update the borough's intention to obtain the uplands through the public and charitable use program rather than the municipal entitlement program. This is at the direction of the Alaska Department of Natural Resources. We didn't qualify for the municipal entitlement program. So I'd entertain a motion to adopt this resolution.
So move.
Second. Motion been made by member Lynn and seconded by member Kinsinger. Discussion. Marsh.
Yes, thank you. So just to clarify that because we did not qualify under the municipal entitlement program, the public use, public and charitable use doesn't necessarily put us at a lesser advantage to have these lands transferred. Is that my understanding?
Maybe the manager could clarify, but my understanding is that there will be more costs associated with this potentially, and we won't know that. But Manager Giesbrecht?
Thank you, sir. Yes, the municipal entitlement would have been low to no cost. The public and charitable use program would mean at some point the borough could potentially be asked by DNR to actually buy the property at appraised value. DNR says that because we're a municipality, there's a chance that they would negotiate that when we get to that point. The Borough Assembly gets to weigh in on that. So we can go down the road. They're waiving the application fee. And then at some point, if they come back and say it's going to cost $200,000 for the borough to proceed, the assembly would have the option to say, we're done. But potentially this could cost more if it goes that far.
But this is just a starting point to further the negotiation since they denied the land entitlement.
Yes, sir.
Process. Remember Lynn?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's very important, whatever we do to keep all that together, the parking lot, the ramps and the floats, everything together, because as we separate one from another, that significantly complicates that whole process. So I think this is the right way to go.
Well, we'll see where it leads us, I guess. Is there any other discussion on this resolution? Clerk, please call the roll.
Scott, Thomas,
Yes.
Donna, Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Okay, resolution 2023-01 passes unanimously. That brings us to resolution 2023-02. This is a resolution supporting the Southeast Alaska troll fishery and urging the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to commit the necessary resources to defend Alaska's fisheries. Many other communities around Southeast have been sending resolutions and some of them supplying financial aid. But I received a call from a local troller that is a member of the Alaska Trollers Association, and you just asked if we were gonna consider any kind of resolution, and by that time I already talked to the clerk about it. So this came from that. So I'd entertain a motion to support resolution 2023-02.
So move.
Second.
Motion by member Lynn, seconded by member Kinsinger. Any discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
David,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Scott, Thomas,
Yes.
Donna.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that passes unanimously as well, so we'll send that resolution off as well. So the next item, C, Housing Task Force, Petersburg Land Trust. The Housing Task Force is looking for direction from the Assembly to investigate the potential of developing a land trust in Petersburg. And to see an example of a successful land trust, see Sitka's Community Land Trust at this website. And we had a report from Gary Alba earlier, so I guess I'd entertain a motion to support this request.
So move.
Second. Yes, and Mr. Mayor, the reason these three items are on here because so we don't waste your time and the housing task force time. we wanted to see a vote up or down on these concepts. If you voted down, we won't pursue it anymore, but this doesn't obligate you to anything. It just means that we're going to continue to work on these. If it's a concept or an idea you just don't like, vote no. If it's one you like, vote yes. And that goes for all three of these items that are on the agenda.
So if we support these three requests, excuse me, the task force will just continue working, and in the meantime, excuse me again, we will wait for our report to come back and then, you know, give us the direction that they suggest. I mean, I'm interested in seeing the results of that report. I mean, they're gonna suggest we need just summer housing for the workforce, for the fisheries and tourism, or what that report's gonna say. But anyway, right now, we're just addressing these two requests by the Housing Task Force, or support, I guess, from the Assembly. Is that correct?
Like I said, if you like the idea, vote yes. If you don't like the idea, vote no, and we won't pursue it anymore. We're just trying to get some clarity on where the Assembly wants us to go.
Okay, any questions? Member Lynn?
Just a comment. I'm going to vote no, not because I don't agree that there needs to be something done, but the more I read about it, the more questions I have, and more questions I have that I'm not, and I compare it to our own situation here, I'm not comfortable enough. I even begin to have enough knowledge to say yes or no on anything like that. It's very, very complicated when I look at it. So I would like to see it. I don't want to see everything killed, but I'd like to kind of see it set in, you know, abeyance. So for a bit till we can get a lot more information at some point. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
Member Kinsinger?
I respect that, Assembly Member Lynn, but you got to understand, we were spending quite a bit of time on this. And if you don't want us to spend any time on it and you don't like the idea, then vote no, as you indicated. If you want us to spend some more time on this and investigate it, you're not voting to start a land trust right now. You're just giving us direction. And as you know, we've all been on committees before, and you can spend months on something and a lot of man hours. And then at the end of the process, it's a non-starter. So I'm just looking for clarity.
Any other discussion on this? Yeah, I'm like Member Lynn. I'll probably vote for it though, but I'm not gonna have any more clarification as to the ins and outs of a land trust unless I get more information presented to me from the task force. And I do have some questions and maybe they could be answered. So if there's no other discussion, Member Marsh.
Thank you. I actually did spend quite a bit of time on this website that was shown here. And it sounds like Sitka has kind of broken ground, maybe here in Southeast for such a concept. I think to me, the idea is intriguing. And I would be interested to see what, you know, unanswered questions we could actually answer and find some information on. So I'll be voting in favor of pursuing the potential of this.
Okay, any other input?
I just wanted to put my 2 cents in. Yeah, like you said, it's a groundbreaking thing in Sitka, and, you know, I think there's some good merits to it. I would like to see some more history behind it, maybe a transfer or two from, you know, to really show that it can truly be successful. One concern I have is additional administrative burden on the borough. So, I mean, Gary commented on that. If we could find volunteers, you know, and it's like you said, that's potentially problematic. Both volunteers quit volunteering. So, I am going to vote yes on it because I think there's potential for it, but it comes with caveat.
Member Fine Walsh.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I appreciate the effort here to try to get some feedback from the Assembly. You know, I think these are all really interesting ideas and I definitely want to hear more about them. The trust specifically, I guess I also sort of similar question, Member Newman there. Who would administer it? You know, is there a reason, you know, that it can't be administered by the borough? Is it just because the borough doesn't have the manpower, or is that something specific to this type of trust? I'd like to know more about that and whether, you know, whether the borough would be able to administer this or if we would have to rely on volunteers, and what that would look like. So yeah, I'm excited to hear more.
Kinsinger.
Oh, just a little bit more clarity. I did visit with them and right now they have a payroll of under $50,000 a year. They have two people, Mim McConnell, and another gentleman, Randy Hughes. Randy takes care of the rounding up the contractors, making sure the work gets done, things of that nature. Mim McConnell is a past mayor in Sitka, so she's been kind of the political arm of it. She's retiring here next month, and they have another lady that's going to take over her position, who's currently on the Sitka Assembly. So yes, they are running it with a paid staff, and that does create problems, of course, because you got to come up with the $50,000 a year to pay the staff. But they recognize after the first few years of operating it, that they had to have somebody on the ground to pay and coordinate everything. The rest of the work that's done is done by a volunteer board, and the paid staff coordinates the board and make sure everything gets done. So that's at least how they're doing it in Sitka. Whether that'd be a model for Petersburg or not, that would remain to be seen.
If there's no other discussion, we'll have the clerk call the roll on the land trust idea.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
No.
David,
Yes.
Donna, Thomas,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Okay, the request passes, or of the housing task force to keep looking into that with a 6-1 vote with member Len opposed. That moves us to item D, housing task force easily developable lots. The housing task force is requesting the assembly through manager Giesbrecht, utility director Hagerman, to identify existing residentially zoned wooded borough lots that can be easily connected to water, sewer, and electric services, and bring them forward to the assembly to consider offering for public sale. Entertain a motion to approve this request.
So move.
Second.
Discussion. Member Marsh.
Yes, I guess I questioned the word, the specificity of the residentially zoned wooded borough lots. It seems like there could be the possibility, the potential of identifying numerous lots, wooded or not, that the borough could put up for sale. And the owner, the new owner, providing, the connectability to the public utilities. So I'm not sure why the specificity of wooded is important in this discussion. So I'll leave it at that.
Member Kinsinger, can you give us a little enlighten us on why that language was in there?
No. I don't think we need to have any. Once again, this was meant, if you guys want this, Manager Giesbrecht would request that Carl look a little bit closer at any lots available. We could just say any lots that are borough lots that are available.
Member Len.
Just a comment. I spent some time with Carl last week talking about some of this. One of his concerns is that we do have other lots where we have utilities run, except that they're maxed out. In other words, you can't add a lot more houses or that type of things without, changing the lines all the way back to the main line type of a thing. That was the first part. The second part is we also have a group of them where our piping is nowhere near code, is what he was telling me. And so you don't even want to consider those. But there were a few lots that had the line sewer and water towards it to the end of the previous owners, and it could be extended on without much cost associated with it. And there are some of those, and that's what I'm hoping I go back to Member Kinsinger. I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I would think if we move forward with this idea and Utility Director Hagerman looks into it, he will probably appraise us of the condition of the main feed. So we'll have an idea whether it's doable in that neighborhood or not. So any other discussion?
Got a question. How are we gonna administer the sale of these lots?
But, well, according to our charter, we have to sell them, if I'm not mistaken, for appraised value, but, that'd be up to the, well, I'd have to go to a vote to change the code, I believe. Could you explain?
Well, a couple of things. We'll take the list that Gary spent a tremendous amount of time and effort on. Carl did the same, and we'll come up with some lots that are closest to being ready to go. We'll bring that back to the assembly. So that's one thing. Lots have to be sold to the public. The assembly gets to decide how that's done, either closed bid auction or open outcry auction. Trying to think. Most of the time we do that in outcry auction. And then the last thing is if you're going to do the land trust thing, you might want to keep some of these in your back pocket because they may be good lots for the land trust. So the assembly will have to decide how they want to approach that when we get to that point. But anyway.
We envision this being a decision of the assembly, depending upon what your goal is. We have it within our power to change the ordinance on how we deal with the sale of these lots. If we want to put conditions on them, like they have to be first-time home buyers, can't presently own a home. I mean, we can do all those types of things. It just depends upon what we do or want to do or what the need is. I think if somebody came up, I know PIA last summer, I believe, was looking for a lot to put a duplex on. So, I mean, it just depends upon what we want to do, you know. We have that within our power. I would like to see what comes from the housing assessment and says what our need is. My feeling is, and this is just a feeling, and I can't base it upon anything outside of that, is that there's quite a few single family lots that are available out the road. The Weaver, Pat Weaver's subdivision. I've heard that there's possible another subdivision that's going to come in. So I don't want to have the borough be in competition with these, but I also realize that there's a need for certain niches in the market that those aren't going to fulfill. Because if you go out and build a house, you know, $210 a square foot, just do the math. And that's before you even buy the land or put anything in. Most people, you know, unless you have resources, can't afford to do that any longer.
We're fine, Walsh.
Yeah, and I think the key word here is easily developable, developable, however you want to say it, but easily, you know, like we're not looking for every possible lot, you know, that could be done. But I believe that the intent here to assess the land we have and make sure that we're using it in the most efficient way possible is really good. And that should kind of always be a goal, especially now that development is more expensive. It makes more sense to be a little bit more focused about it and make sure that we're using what we have to the best ability that we can. Thanks.
I would say that when we were paying for a housing needs assessment, we probably should wait until that's completed and then maybe try to tailor this to the demographic that needs it the most.
Yeah, that's my thought. I mean, I don't see a problem with locating lots. And I guess from that, we could, when we get the housing needs assessment of Petersburg, then we could see if any of these lots fit the bill. I mean, how much legwork, Manager Giesbrecht, is it going to take to locate these lots? I mean,
Carl's actually done some work for the housing task force already on this. So he's got a list of several lots with, you know, what their condition is as far as utilities go. So we've got a place to start that, you know, Dave and Gary Albach and the group have actually had us already working on some of that. So which is great. So we'll have some that we can bring forward. And then it's going to be up to the assembly. Do you want to proceed? You know, Carl can put, what we don't have is costs. What we have is things like we need 200 feet of water line. So putting costs to those numbers takes a little bit longer, and Carl will take a look at that when he gets back.
so that will, you know, not necessarily be a to the penny amount, but just
Yeah, correct.
Perfect.
Actually, what we'll likely do is use some of the P&D information we got, because it's fairly current, and just kind of try to scale it to individual houses. What were they charging for 200 feet of water line? And we'll try to use some of that.
Okay, is there any other discussion on this? Looking for easily developable lots? Not, clerk call the roll.
Mark,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Bob.
Yes.
Scott. Jeff.
Yes.
Okay, so that idea passes unanimously. Next idea is item E, or next topic, is Housing Task Force Manufactured Home Area. The Housing Task Force is looking for assembly direction to investigate and propose to the Planning Commission to develop an area specifically for manufactured homes in Petersburg. I'd entertain a motion to approve this request.
So moved.
Seconded.
Motion made by member Kinsinger, seconded by member Fine Walsh. Any discussion? Lynn?
Yeah, if we could, I'd ask, Liz to give us a little background on our definitions and how, in her view, on this, on what needs to be done here, or what changes in some code or what have you, if we proceed with some of this. The pros and cons, if you could, please.
Certainly the rezone is something that you all are familiar with. You just went through that process. So it would be the same process of rezoning a parcel. It goes to the planning commission and then you need to do 3 readings. I believe the parcels that Sarah was referring to are multifamily, and currently with a conditional use permit, you can put manufactured homes on, or mobile homes is what we call it in our code, on multifamily. If you're interested in the shorter process, the conditional use permit process is handled by the Planning Commission. It takes 2 meetings. The conditional use permit runs with the land. So it's a permanent addition to, a permanent option for that parcel. The rezone can be initiated by the assembly or by the Planning Commission. It takes a Planning Commission meeting and then 3 readings by the assembly. As far as our definitions, we currently use mobile home as a definition, which is kind of the outdated term for a manufactured home. Manufactured home refers to housing that is built under the HUD code, which is a federal housing code. And just to distinguish that from modular home, a modular home also comes in pieces, but that is built to International Residential Code, which is the code that we use within the Service Area 1. So when a modular home comes to Petersburg, it already has been inspected under IRC by an IRC inspector, and will have a certificate as such. And those can be placed in single-family residential lots and multifamily lots and all different kind of residential areas. The manufactured home built under the HUD code can only be placed in area zoned for single-family mobile home, a mobile home park. And then with conditional use permit, it can be in an industrial area or multifamily. Hopefully I got that right. I usually have my big book, which I reference, so. I don't know if there's anything else.
So manufactured homes then are essentially built to a lesser restriction or lesser building standard, or?
It depends on how you want to look at that. Some people say yes, it's a different code, it's a different process. But I would say too that if you build a stick-built house just to code, it's not going to be a quality house. So you always want to go beyond what that code is. So really it's going to come back to workmanship and materials used and things like that. I think that HUD code has improved over the years. If you wanted to add a little more to that, you could do things like require that manufactured homes meet snow load or insulation values. And that really beefs up the structure and makes for a longer lasting structure and better insulated structure. It will also significantly increase the cost, of course. But there are different options you can do with that, you know. I think if you got a manufactured home with the snow load and insulation, I would think that's a decent, really decent home to have in town.
Any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Donna,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Okay, that idea passes unanimously as well. That brings us to item F, prioritize Petersburg's 2023 federal projects list. There are 7 items on the list, I believe. They're not ranked in any kind of priority right now. That's what we're doing this exercise for. The first one is the hospital, and there's marine transportation access improvements for the borough. I believe that's Banana Point. And then another one is ADA ramps. Fourth one is Scow Bay boat haul out and washdown facility. And the Scow Bay generator, aquatic center and community gym refurbishment, and subdivision builds for workforce housing. So I guess at this point, we just need to entertain a motion for someone to come up with what they want as far as a priority and what ranking.
So moved.
Kinsinger.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we have the Petersburg Medical Center project as our #1 priority.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Member Marsh.
Yes, I actually ranked these. I put the Petersburg Medical Center at number 7. And the reason is, in my own personal endeavors, my husband and I have encountered everything from 50 to 100% inflationary costs with supply chain issues. And I notice here that we've got a 5% variance for inflation, which I don't think anywhere comes anywhere close to what it will need. It seems that the hospital is struggling in this detailed report, which I appreciate from CEO Hofstetter. It doesn't seem to be paying its way. I think a new one will be more of everything, more costs, more employees. It's going to take a serious group of people to man it, to maintain it. And whereas I realize the current one has some struggles, I don't think that a new hospital at this time in Petersburg would be good for the community. There's still some missing pieces in my calculations, but that's where I see. I would put the Scow Bay generator as #1 in my priority list.
Okay, so I guess the way we're doing this, the motion on the floor is, and the second is to support the medical center as its #1 project, and you voiced your concerns. Any other comments by assembly members? Member Newman.
I would like to voice my support for the new medical center. I view it as, since they're the largest employer in Petersburg, I think a new facility with expanded services could potentially become, a healthcare destination. Healthcare is a huge issue affecting everybody everywhere, and Southeast Alaska is, a lot of people, I talked to people today that have to travel for some issues that could potentially be addressed here in the future with like an MRI. So I view this as an economic driver for our community, and I feel like we need it.
Brian Walsh.
Yeah, and I just want to support that sentiment. I believe it could be an economic driver. I know we've talked at length about the possibility of kind of incorporating some housing development into this project as well. It may make it more economically feasible to do some subdivision development in the area, and I think that is also really worth considering. This could have kind of knock-on effects, beneficial effects for the community. It is a big expense, but I don't really see what our other option is. The facility we have currently is not sufficient and is aging out. So, I mean, we can't not have a hospital. So yeah, it seems like a good choice to put first.
Okay, I support a new medical facility in Petersburg of some type. Couple of concerns I have, I touched on earlier, is this, you know, we've been talked about in the last meetings, we have $28 million, but the $20 million is pending. And I understand there's a lot of strings attached to that $20 million. I don't know what kind of strings are attached. I'd like to see that clarified, and if we do get the money, that would give us more money, upfront. The inflationary, dollar amount from 3 years ago pre-COVID to what this $84 million facility would, the proposed cost now, what are the 2023 numbers? And I'm appreciative that we're gonna have a, work session to go over a lot of this stuff. I can't support it as number one. I support it as being on the list. So, my idea of the number one project would be the Scout Bay turnaround. So we get the wash down pad and a better haul out facility to keep some of our fishing boats getting work done in Petersburg and getting a certified wash down facility. So we can keep doing that work in town, because at some point we might lose our capability to do that, on the waterfront. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. If there's no other input on medical center being number one on our priority list, the clerk call the roll.
Thomas,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Donna, Mark,
No. Okay, the Petersburg Medical Center will be the number one request on our federal priorities list, with members Marsh and Mayor Jensen opposed. That brings us down to the remaining 6 items. So if
Mr. Mayor.
anybody has a motion.
I'm sorry, just to jump in. There doesn't have to be 7 on the list. So
Correct.
I didn't make that clear earlier. So there's
Generally,
no,
we have like 3 or 4.
it's however you want this to look.
So, Member Lynn,
Yes. I would move to make the Scow Bay generator number 2 and Scow Bay boat harbor boat haul out is number 3.
is there a second?
second.
Okay, discussion on that.
May I?
Member Lynn,
And the reason I want to pull the Scow Bay generator up to number 2 and talking with Carl. Our electrical increases are about 3% a year. Last year and this year, we maxed out SEPA power. We're looking at bringing other generation things online. When we got approval for the bond payment, the idea was that that Scow Bay generator would be part of that bond payment. The problem we ran into is, of course, inflation and the cost to replace that turbine and stuff at Crystal Bay is going way up, and we don't have the money to buy that other generator. If we get another winter like we had last year, and this year we went through a period where we and Wrangell were going back and forth providing power to the communities. We need, in my opinion, we need to bring that generator, buy that generator, put it in the facility and bring it online, because I don't know if we can bring new SEPA power online before we're gonna really, really need this. That's my argument for putting that as number 2.
the other input on this motion that's on the floor about the Scow Bay generator being number 2 and Scow Bay haul out facility being number 3. Clerk call the roll.
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. So number 2 and 3 are the Scow Bay generator and the Scow Bay haul out. That leaves us with 4 topics, and like the manager said, or 4 projects. We don't have to prioritize all of them. I suppose if people want to, we could either leave these as the top 3 priorities, the ones we just voted on, and just put the other ones on the list. And wherever you know, it depends on where the funding comes from, is what you're gonna get money, you know, for. You might not get money for any project, but you might be developing harbors, so Scout Bay might end up getting money before the medical center or the generator, so. Anyway, that's just a thought. We could, make a motion to just send the remaining 4 uncategorized, or someone could make a motion to categorize it.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we not categorize the remainder of the projects.
Second.
Discussion? And everybody's in favor of leaving the remaining 4 on the list? Okay, clerk, call the roll.
Scott,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Donna, Jeff,
Yes.
Okay, we've got through that task today, and for some reason I'm having this PDF expert or whatever does not agreeing with me. Ah, there we go. I'm just not operating it correctly. Okay, next item, item G, trip to Washington DC, who and when. The assembly will need to decide, 1, who will accompany Mayor Jensen to Washington DC as approved at the January 17th, 2023 assembly meeting, and 2, what dates will work for the best trip. Our federal lobbyist Sebastian O'Kelly has suggested the following dates for meetings with our Alaska delegation and various federal agencies. February 27th to March 1st, March 23rd to March 24th, and I believe April is out of the question now. Member Giesbrecht, is our manager Giesbrecht, is that correct?
Yes, sir. And the March date has been changed. It's moved to 28th and 29th.
Correct.
It's available. And nothing's available in April, and May is fairly open.
So I would suggest that we do this in 2 different votes. 1, who's gonna go, and then we'll follow up on the 2, who's gonna, you know, what date. So I'd entertain a motion to someone to decide who's gonna, well, says accompany the mayor, but maybe you don't want me to go, but we'll entertain a motion to do so.
I'll make a motion that the mayor and Assembly Member Lynn, if he's amenable, go.
Second.
Just to throw it out, I'd like to see if there's any other assembly members interested, and I would highly recommend that the manager accompanies whatever assembly members that do go. He's got the knowledge of more knowledge than, you know, well, at least that I do of total operations of the community, so. Member Newman.
I'm interested in going.
Okay. So make an amendment, I guess, and add your name, and then if you get a second, you'll be on the vote.
Propose an amendment to add my name to the list to go to Washington DC.
Second motion, otherwise I would.
Second.
Okay, so it's seconded by member Lynn. So now we have a proposal for myself, the mayor, member Lynn, and member Newman to go. Member by motion.
I would also like to throw my name in the hat or propose an amendment, if Bob, if you're amenable to go in place of Bob, just so we can, amend, so it'd be, the amendment being to remove Bob's name and put mine in place of his.
Are you good with that, member Lynn?
I am good.
Is there a second to that?
I'll
I'll second that.
Okay, so currently we're talking about Mayor Jensen, Assembly Member Newman, and Assembly Member Fine Walsh going. And I still think it's important that the manager makes the trip. Second.
I'll move to add the manager to that trip. And I agree with you, Mayor.
Second.
Second.
Okay, discussion. We don't know the cost, I guess, but the clerk will work on that. It's not cheap, and I think 4 is probably about the maximum that we would want to take. From conversations with our lobbyist, he said prior, well, it was city council members, they'd take the whole herd, and it'd be like 8 of them in the room, or 7 or 8 people, and it got kind of overwhelming. You didn't get much good dialogue with the representatives. So what we're voting on here is Mayor Jensen, Member Newman, Member Fine Walsh, and the manager making a trip to Washington DC. Clerk call the roll.
Bob,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
Okay, that is who's selected to go. Now we need to pick a date. And with the current discussion that's coming, that we've been having with our lobbyist on dates available. I was for going end of February, 1st of March, but some of our senators are gonna be traveling. We're not sure if they're gonna be back in DC. So I would think late March, 28th and 9th, are those the dates that Sebastian gave you, Manager Giesbuck?
Yes, sir.
I would entertain a motion to request those dates.
Second.
Yeah. I
Need a
do.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I'll make a motion then to,
Second.
because, yeah, 28,
Motion
29.
was made by Member Lynn, seconded by Member Fine Walsh to travel to Washington DC the last week of March. Good enough, I guess. Does people that are interested in going, does that fit your schedule?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll vote on the March 28th and 29th date. Clerk call the roll.
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Scott.
Yeah.
Thomas,
Yes.
Jeff.
Yep.
Mark,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Okay, we'll have the manager and the clerk work with Sebastian O'Kelly on the availability of meetings, and then we'll look at tickets and hotels and go from there. Next item, H, request for a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers study for a future harbor in Scow Bay. Harbor Master Wolin is seeking approval of a letter to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers requesting they initiate a study to construct a harbor basin, breakwater, and all navigation features needed for a future harbor in Scow Bay. I'd entertain a motion to approve this letter.
So move.
Second.
And a lot of this, some of this stemmed from, well, it's a good idea, I think, the Scow Basin development, but the Corps was in town looking at our dredging, I believe, and then they got a tour of Scow Bay and they were kind of interested in looking into the project. Member or Glow, can you add to that? Department of Wolin?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're pretty excited about this. It is the fellow that ends up putting together the budget. And so he wanted to get a good look at it to see, what they would have to spend if they did get into feasibility study, which we would cost share. And he pointed out three things that we have going for it. The real estate, we own the property that would be developed. The need is there with a decade-long waiting list. And one thing they like to see is that the dredge spoils could be reused in the uplands. So all of those things being, kind of the project has a lot of things going for it. And so he felt pretty confident that they would find enough money to move forward with the feasibility study. So he requested that we resubmit this letter. So we updated it for you to sign, and hopefully we can strike up a partnership and move forward.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just to add in, thank you, Glo. So the feasibility study is just whether the numbers work. And I'm doing this for new assembly members, honestly. It's about $1 million. He was his quick estimate just to do the feasibility study. That's why it's a cost share is really important. Another part of that is there's an opportunity to partner with tribal organizations, and they take even more off the price. So we'll be talking to Chad and his board at some point. And if, others as well, if need be, but that cost share agreement is huge for obvious reasons. That takes money that the borough would not have to spend to get the feasibility study done to know whether the Corps is interested in moving forward. So anyway, I want everybody to hear the background on it.
Approximately $800,000, and we'd split that with the Corps. Is that correct?
Say that again?
Supposed to be $800,000 and we split it with the Corps.
Correct. Yeah, so being able to share it and potentially even again, have a tribal partner on it, which even makes that less that the borough would have to spend is a big deal.
So at this point, we're just asking for them to do a feasibility study. Then if we send this letter, they approve it, then we'll get a invoice.
Not quite. What they'll do is they'll try to budget for it. At some point, they'll tell us, looks like we're gonna have the money to do this, and then it comes into a whole bunch of contract time. So it comes back to the assembly to approve contracts. And we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk through that and decide how the assembly wants to proceed.
Clerk, call the roll. If there's no other discussion. Any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll, please.
Mark,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Donna, Thomas,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Okay, we will be sending a letter. Item I, Mayor Pro Tem for the February 21st, 2023 Assembly meeting. Mayor Jensen and Vice Mayor Lynn will both be attending the Alaska Municipal League's Winter Legislative Conference in Juneau, along with the manager, and will not be available for the February 21st Assembly meeting. The clerk's request is at this meeting, we vote as a body who will be the Mayor Pro Tem at that meeting. So anybody interested in being the Mayor Pro Tem for the 21st? Member Marsh.
I actually like to make a motion that Assembly Member Scott Newman is appointed Mayor Pro Tem to chair the meeting.
Second. Okay, there is a slight chance that I might not be traveling to Juneau, but I'm not sure of that. So at least if I didn't travel to Juneau, I'd be here to chair the meeting, but this way we have it, the bases covered. So, discussion? Any other discussion? So we have a motion on the floor with a second for Member Newman to be the vice mayor on the 21st in the absence of the mayor and the current vice mayor. Clerk, call the roll.
Scott, Bob, Mark,
Yes.
David,
I guess since he said yes, I'll vote yes too.
Thomas,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Okay, so we have an appointed Mayor Pro Tem for the meeting on the February 21st. Item J, reschedule October 2nd, 2023 Assembly meeting due to the October 3rd, 2023 municipal election. The clerk's office requests the October 2nd, 2023 noon assembly meeting be moved to either Friday, October 6th or Monday, October 9th at noon. The certification of the election results could take place at the same meeting. So I'd entertain a motion to move it to noon, October 9th.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so discussion on the October 9th meeting. Does that work? I mean, it'll be a week before, only a week away from the next meeting, but we'll always have something to discuss. So,
That actually works best, in my opinion, because I would be able to put into the packet the form that we use for certification of the election that would have all of the numbers up to the certification, before we open them up in the meeting. So October 9th would be great.
okay, that's the date we're voting on. Clerk, call the roll.
Bob,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Donna.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we may have just set a new trend. Next item on the agenda, communications. There are some communications listed on today's agenda. You can find it on the website, borough website. It's a policy not to read the communications at the meetings. So they're available for people that are interested. Next item on the agenda, 17, assembly discussion items, assembly member comments. Any assembly members have comments today? Member Kinsinger.
Actually, two comments. I want to remind everybody about the chamber banquet that's going to be happening this Saturday at the Sons of Norway Hall at 6 o'clock. Tickets are still available. I believe at Lee's or up at the chamber office. I know all the assembly members are invited. The other comment is I'd like to give I guess this is a recognition. I'd like to thank our harbor master, Glo Wallen, for her visionary work that she has provided the community over the years to make sure that we still have a viable fishing community going forward into the future.
Okay. Other assembly members have comments today? Okay, seeing none, we're looking for recognitions. You've already filled that one, but, we have any recognitions of the assembly members? For anybody? Nope. Okay,
We have Mr. Ryan there in town doing a tourism study and could you maybe speak for a minute and just tell what you're doing? Is that possible or no?
yeah, we have a long meeting ahead of, sure, just a couple minutes, just briefly explain, not to request of assembly member Newman.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan Naylor. I am a PhD student at Penn State University. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a researcher. So I was here in 2019 doing my first research project on the impacts of tourism. It was my first project, just wanted to do it well. And so while I was doing interviews, people would usually stop me about 5 to 10 minutes into the conversation. And they would tell me, hey, don't know where you're going with this, but we don't want to be Juneau, Sitka, or Skagway. And so I asked people why, and they said, well, for some, they believe that those communities don't have any control over the industry. They lost their downtown, they lost their identity. And so that really stuck out with me. I was also planning to come back to Petersburg in 2020. I was doing my analysis from the winter of 2019 to 2020. Unfortunately, a global pandemic hit, so I never had the chance to come back. And so researchers have a bad rap for a good reason of taking and not exactly giving back. And so now I'm returning to the community, both here in Petersburg and comparing it to Wrangell. I know they are very much different communities, but similar in other ways. And so while Petersburg has what I would consider small scale tourism and the geographic limitation of the Narrows, I'm comparing that with Wrangell, in which they do not have that geographic limitation. At the same time, they lost their mill back in the 90s. And so they have taken a pretty diverse step in terms of the economy very well. At the same time, Ketchikan lost their mill. And so they went all into tourism. And so I'm essentially trying to be able to figure out why do these communities take such divergent paths and what can communities do in order to be able to control the impacts of tourism to be able to meet their community goals. So I am just finishing up my primary fieldwork right now. I'll be returning in April to do community engagement. Essentially at that point, I hope to have my interview transcriptions complete and then come back here and be like, all right, am I on the right track? What did I get wrong? What did I get right? How can I continue to be able to manipulate this research so it can be applicable to you all and usable to you all? And so I'll complete that process and then return to be able to hand you all the results next December. I know no one has the time to read a 200-page document, but perhaps maybe a 50-page document and a 1-page executive summary. So that is the goal of the research. And if you are interested, you can feel free to be able to contact me. I can leave my information with Debbie. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other recognitions? Okay, basically ends our regular meeting. Do people want to take a 5-minute break before we start the executive session? Or are we good to move ahead? Are you good to move ahead, Member Mucci, or do you need a break?
I'm ready to go.
Ready to go. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna end this recording.
Okay. Don't we have to make a motion though?
Oh, yes, we do. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, we do.
I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss Borough Manager Giesbrecht's 2022 performance evaluation.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will close the regular meeting and resume into the regular meeting after the executive session. So the Borough Assembly is back in, out of executive session into the regular meeting, and we're on topic 19. And that is approval of Manager Giesbrecht's 2022 performance evaluation. I would entertain a motion to approve Manager Giesbrecht's performance evaluation.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion been made by member Newman, seconded by member Marsh. At this point, we have discussion. If there is no discussion on this or no changes to the performance evaluation, ask the clerk to call the roll.
Jeff,
No.
Scott,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Donna,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
David,
No. Okay, Manager Giesbrecht's evaluation, as discussed, passes with a 4-2 vote. Assemblymember Lynn had to leave for a prior engagement. And Assembly members, Mucci and Kinsinger voted no on the performance evaluation. So with that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.